The frost cracked under his boots like tiny bones, each step a brittle announcement of his intrusion in the pre-dawn silence. The air was ablaze, sharp and clean, scented with old hay and the ghost of wood smoke, and beneath it all the low, sweet smell of horse. It was a smell that used to mean home. Now it just felt like a museum of a life he was no longer allowed to live. What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? The barn, long and shadowed in the weak winter light, felt more like a tomb. Every splintered board, every rusted hinge was a page from his brother's story. A story that had ended too abruptly, the final chapter ripped out and lost. And he, Leo, was now the curator of this unfinished place, the keeper of the last breathing relic. He moved through the aisle, his breath pluming in the still air. The stalls were empty, doors gaping open, their inhabitants sold off one by one to settle debts he hadn't known existed. All except one. At the very end, in the largest stall, a shape shifted in the deep shadows. He could hear her before he saw her. The soft, steady blow of her breath, the quiet shuffle of a hoof on packed earth. He stopped a few feet from the iron bars. He hadn't wanted this. The lawyer's call, the news of the estate, the grim revelation that he was now the sole owner of a rundown Wyoming ranch and one solitary Mustang. A Mustang his brother, Elias, had apparently spent the last year of his life trying to gentle. Leo's life was in a city 1,000 miles away, a life of concrete and deadlines, a life that had no room for ghosts or the animals that carried them. And then he saw her. She was backed into the farthest corner, a sculpture of muscle and shadow and defiance. The dawn light, filtering through a high, dusty window, caught the curve of her neck, the stark white blaze that ran down her face like a lightning strike. She was not beautiful in a gentle way. She was beautiful like a storm is beautiful, all raw power and untamed potential. Her eyes, dark and deep, watched him without blinking, and in them he saw no curiosity, no hope, only a profound, unwavering wariness. She was a mirror, and he was looking at his own reflection. He didn't speak. Words felt too cheap for this space, too human. He just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and let her look her fill. He could see the tension in her, the coiled spring of her readiness to flee from this stranger in her space. Her ears were pinned back, not flat in anger, but in a tight, nervous vigilance. Every few seconds one would flick forward, then back, tracing the sound of his breathing. He remembered something Elias had told him years ago, a lifetime ago, when they were just boys dreaming on a fence rail. "You don't win a horse's trust," he'd said, his voice still light with youth. "You earn it. You have to be the calmest thing in the room." Leo felt anything but calm. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, beating out a rhythm of grief and guilt and a strange, aching responsibility. But he forced his shoulders to relax. He dropped his gaze from her intense stare, looking instead at the powerful curve of her shoulder. He made himself smaller, less of a threat. Minutes stretched, measured only by the cloud of their breath mingling in the cold air. The world outside this stall didn't exist. There was no city, no job, no complicated past. There was only this frozen moment between a broken man and a guarded animal. He didn't see her move so much as he felt the air change. A slight softening of the tension, a quiet sigh that wasn't his own. He risked a glance up. She had taken one step forward. Just one. Out of the deep shadow and into a sliver of light. Her head was still high, her posture still wary, but the pinched look around her eyes had eased. She was looking at him now not as a predator but as a puzzle. Another eternity passed. A crow caught outside, a harsh sound that made them both flinch. But neither moved. Then slowly, with an air of immense deliberation, she took another step. And another. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body, could see the delicate network of veins under her skin, could smell the honest scent of her, dust and grass and animal. She stretched her neck, her nostrils flaring wide as she sampled his scent. He held his breath. Her nose, velvet and surprisingly soft, hovered an inch from the sleeve of his jacket. She sniffed once, twice, a quick investigating sound. He could see the dark depths of her nostrils, the fine hairs within. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to touch. He just stood, offering nothing but his presence as she decided whether he was worthy of it. Her investigation moved from his sleeve to his hand, which he slowly, carefully, drew from his pocket. He kept his fingers relaxed, his palm down. She nudged his knuckles with her nose. the touch so light it was almost imaginary. It was an electric feeling. A thread finer than spider silk, being spun between them in the frozen air. He exhaled. A long, shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. And in that moment, she did something that stopped his heart. She let her head drop just a little. The proud arch of her neck softened. She didn't nuzzle. She didn't seek affection. She simply rested. Her forehead was now mere inches from his chest, her breath warming the front of his coat. It was a gesture of such profound, tentative fatigue. It wasn't trust, not yet. It was a ceasefire, a momentary laying down of arms. He looked at the worn leather halter hanging on a hook outside the stall. Elias's initials scratched into the brass nameplate. A thing meant to lead to control. He knew he should put it on her. He should feed her, check the water, do the practical things that needed doing. But as he stood there in the quiet barn, with the heat of this creature seeping into his bones, the halter seemed like a violation, a demand, and she had given him this one fragile gift of proximity. He took one step back, then another, retreating slowly, respectfully breaking the spell. She lifted her head, her ears swiveling forward, watching him go. He turned to walk away, the weight of the morning and the emptiness of the house ahead of him feeling heavier than ever. He didn't know why he did it. He didn't know what possessed him. But he paused at the barn door and looked back, and the horse, the storm-eyed Mustang, took a single step out of her stall and into the aisle. She stood there silhouetted against the morning light and waited. The days bled into one another, a monotony of gray skies and quiet chores. Leo fell into a rhythm dictated by the horse he still couldn't bring himself to name. He'd call her girl or mare, but never her given name, the one Elias had chosen. To use it felt like stealing. Their interactions were a careful, silent dance. He'd muck the stall while she watched from the far corner. He'd pour fresh grain, and she'd wait until he'd retreated to the doorway before approaching the bucket. The progress was microscopic, measured in the slight decrease in the flightiness of her step when he entered. The way her ears would flick toward him now with a curiosity that was slowly replacing her fear. But it was a fragile piece, built on a foundation of things left entirely unsaid. The strange behavior started subtly. He'd be talking to himself, muttering about the stubborn latch on the tackroom door or the price of oats in town, and a certain word would make her freeze. Once he sighed and said, "All right, Eli, let's get this done," using the old shorthand for his brother. And the mare's head had snapped up from her hay, her whole body rigid, staring at him as if he'd shouted. She'd stayed like that for a full minute before slowly, cautiously returning to her feed. Another time, he'd brought an old worn saddle blanket out into the sun to air it out. It was one of Elias's, smelling faintly of him, liniment and leather and cheap aftershave. Leo had shaken it out over the fence rail, and a sound from the barn had made him turn. The mare was at the stall door. Her head high, her nostrils flared so wide he could see the pink inside. She let out a low, questioning nicker, a sound he had never heard her make before. It wasn't a sound for him. It was a sound for someone else, someone lost. A cold dread began to pool in Leo's stomach. This wasn't just a horse. She was an archive, a living, breathing museum of his brother's last year, and he was an illiterate visitor, stumbling through the exhibits, unable to read the signs. The breaking point came on a day that felt no different from any other. He was in the small, cluttered office at the back of the barn, a room he'd been avoiding. It was an avalanche of unpaid bills, horse magazines, and dust. He was trying to bring order to the chaos, his movements brisk and practical, a defense against the emotion that clung to every object. And then he found it. Tucked inside a veterinary manual used as a bookmark was a folded piece of lined paper. Elias's messy, sprawling handwriting covered it. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was just thoughts, a fragment of a day, March 12th. Cold, she let me touch her today. Just for a second. My fingers on her neck. She flinched, but she didn't bolt. I called her Ember, for the fire in her, and because her blaze looks like an ember caught in the wind. She's the only thing that makes sense out here. The only thing that doesn't ask for anything I can't give. The words were a physical blow. Leo's knees buckled. He sank into the dusty desk chair, the paper trembling in his hand. He read it again and again. The raw loneliness in the words was a key that unlocked everything he'd been holding back. The image of his brother out here all alone, finding his only solace in the trust of a wild thing, a trust he had earned. A trust Leo was now failing. The grief he had been rationing, meting out in small, manageable doses, now broke its banks. It was a tsunami, and it drowned him. A sob ripped from his throat, harsh and ugly in the silent room. He folded over, his forehead pressing into the cold wood of the desk, the paper crumpled in his fist. He cried for the brother he'd been too busy to call, for the distance he'd let grow between them, for the stupid, trivial arguments he couldn't even remember the reasons for. He cried for the man who had found a friend in a Mustang, while his own brother lived 1,000 miles away. The guilt was a weight, crushing his chest, making it hard to breathe. He was lost in the storm, unaware of anything but the pain. He didn't hear the soft shuffle of hooves on the concrete aisle. He didn't see the shadow fall across the doorway. He felt her first. A warmth at his side, a soft, steady blow of air against his ear, then the pressure. The solid, undeniable weight of her head resting on his shoulder. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't move. He couldn't. Ember stood there, her neck stretched over the office threshold, her head heavy and warm on his slumped form. She didn't nudge. She didn't whinny. She simply rested. She held the weight of his grief with him. Her breathing was deep and slow, a rhythm of pure animal calm. She stayed there, a silent, solid anchor in the tumultuous sea of his sorrow. She was bearing witness. She was saying without a single word, "I know. I remember too." And in that moment, the invisible wall between them shattered. He wasn't a stranger intruding on her and her past. She wasn't just a relic of his brother. They were two souls bridged by the same love, grieving the same man. She had chosen to cross the aisle, to step out of her stall of memory and come to him. The storm within him began to quiet. His sobs subsided into shaky breaths. He slowly straightened up and she lifted her head, but she didn't pull away. Her dark eye was soft, liquid, looking at him without a trace of wariness. She nudged his hand with her nose, a gentle, deliberate press. He uncurled his fingers, revealing the crumpled paper. She sniffed it once and then let out a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. It was a sound of recognition, of shared memory. Time did what it always does. It passed. Weeks turned into months. The deep snows of winter gave way to the hesitant thaw of spring. The ranch was no longer a museum. It was just a home. Leo's hands, once soft from keyboard work, were now calloused and permanently etched with dirt. His city life felt like a dream belonging to another person. And Ember was no longer a ghost. She was his partner. She'd meet him at the gate, her ears pricked forward. She'd follow him around the pasture without a lead rope. She'd take apples from his palm with a gentleness that felt like a gift. The fire was still there, but it was a hearth fire now, not a wildfire. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple over the mountains, Leo was brushing her in the yard. Her coat gleamed, a testament to good care and good health. He was working on a particularly stubborn patch of mud on her flank when his brush caught on something. It wasn't a burr or a tangle. It was small and flat, wedged deep in the thick hair near the top of her hind leg. His fingers worked it loose. It was a photograph, laminated in thick, clear plastic, the edges rounded from wear. It had been tucked into her halter, he realized, and had worked its way into her coat over time, hidden. He turned it over. It was a picture of Elias. He was leaning against the very fence Leo was now leaning against. His face turned toward the camera, smiling a real, unguarded smile that Leo hadn't seen in years. And pressed against his side, her head tilted towards him, was Ember. Her eyes were half closed in contentment, her nose touching his jacket sleeve. It was a picture of perfect, quiet trust, a secret moment of happiness captured and kept safe. Leo didn't cry. He just smiled, a slow, real smile that felt unfamiliar on his own face. He looked from the photo to the real Ember, who had turned her head to look at him, her ears soft and curious. He held the picture up for her to see. She sniffed at it, and then, with a deep, knowing quiet, she rested her head against his chest, just as she had that first morning in the barn. But this time it wasn't a ceasefire. It was a homecoming. He understood now. Elias hadn't left him a problem to solve or a burden to bear. He had left him a bridge. A way back, not to the past, but to a different future, a better one. He slipped the photograph into his pocket, his hand resting on the warm, solid strength of the mare beside him. The sky was darkening, the first stars pricking through the deep blue. The silence was no longer empty. It was full. It was whole. Sometimes the ones who carry you are the ones no one else saw coming. If this story found a home in your heart, then you know these moments are why we do this. To find connection, to remember to feel a little less alone. If you want to be here for the next story that just might change your day, your week, or maybe even your heart, then subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling us what you felt, and most importantly, press that bell icon so you won't miss a single one of our daily stories. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.